Hello, how's everyone doing? Everyone well? Excellent. So I'm Jonny Rae Evans. It was a friend, I have no friends. Someone recently said to me that if you just have my name and no other data, Jonny Rae Evans, that you might imagine like a trombone player in a cool 1950s New Orleans jazz band. But then you meet me, it's just the most disappointing experience ever. So if you saw my name on the website and thought, oh, that'll be interesting. You've been sold a lie, I'm really sorry. There'll be no trombone, there'll be no jazz. But we are going to talk about death, so that's always fun. I don't have any time for jokes, what am I doing? Let's just keep going. Okay, so I'm going to be talking to you about the concept of designing for good and some of the challenges that I've run into when I've done this. Does any of this work? There we go. I'll tell you a little bit about myself first, if that's okay. Like, why should you listen to me? You probably shouldn't, but we're kind of all locked into this together now. By day, I'm head of product innovation at Big Lottery Fund. I work with a development team on designing products and services to help communities across the UK flourish through our funding programs. By night, this is going so well. There we go. I help co-found an organisation called Tech for Good Live. We put on a big monthly event around a thematic topic around Tech for Good, and we also release a podcast every week or so. I'm also a designer, who knew that was coming. On Thursday, we release a special documentary series on the circular economy, and we've got one coming out in the new year around tech that helps empower the workforce. I'm a designer, is kind of what I do. As my job. I've been doing it for maybe like 14 years or so now. I've moved through various different fields of design, I would say. I quite like what I do. I love writing. I'm not very good at it, but it is something that I love to do. My mum kind of got me into this when I was little. She caught me in a lie. I've got like two older brothers, and I think I'd framed them for something, so she sat me on a knee and said, Jonathan, because she's my mum, in this family we don't tell lies, but we can tell stories, and my punishment was to go away and write a story, come back, read it to her. She'd help me make it into something that was less awful. And we did that. I mean, we don't still do that. If I sat in her knee now, it would be a little weird. But I'm not very good at it, but it is something that I love to do. I'm not very good at it, timing. I have epilepsy, so I was diagnosed when I was second year of uni. I was about 19, would that work out? And it like devastated my early 20s. It was like really awful. It was hard to kind of prepare for anything in life. Was genuinely quite grim. I don't recommend it, but I do get like free cinema pass for a friend, and I get cheap rail travel. So, you know. I play 3 instruments, impressively all consistently badly, and when I was younger I was in like a variety of really terrible bands with like really weird names, so it's another thing I'm not good at. There's like a delay on these, is it going to work? There we go. I have a really close-knit family. I kind of love my family. We've all used to live geographically close to each other. Used to live opposite my brother, around the corner from my mum and dad, and another brother lived like 2 doors down. So, you know, you'd come home from a night out and the next day they'd be like, what were you doing last night? But we're quite close in a healthy way. This is my nephew, Noah. He's dead cute, holding a piece of technology. Recently said I was his best friend, which is adorable. But then on reflection, I realised that he's my best friend, which is just more sad and depressing. Self-reporting is really bad research, but I like to think I'm a nice guy. So I asked some friends, and they said I am, but sometimes a bit of a dick, but mostly a nice guy. So this is now science, because I did some research. I'm fond of graphs. This is like the worst dating profile ever, isn't it? I'm quite fond of graphs. Anyone else like visual representation of data? Yeah, everyone nodding. Yeah. Here's a graph. So this is my dickishness over time. Do we have a laser pen? Oh, good tech. We have a laser pen. Tech for good right there. So when you're born, unless you're like, you got numbers like 666, you're probably not that much of a dick. I guess troublesome twos, I suppose. At high school, I fell into like a bad crowd. Oh, was I the bad crowd? Who knows? And then I started dating this wonderful girl. We fell in love, like a high school romance. And she fixed me. So I stopped smoking. I kind of slid down this thing. And like things were great for like 3 years. And then when we were 17, she, under really kind of horrible circumstances, died. And I went into this horrible period of just despair and misery. A teacher very much saved my life. I knew I'd become a massive dick because at the end of class, he asked me to stay behind and said, "You've become a massive dick, and you're probably going to die," and encouraged me to get help. And doctors and nurses and medication and friends are wonderful. And slowly but surely, I've been, getting healthier. I started working at a digital agency that only focuses on doing good for a few years. So working with charities and startups on pro-social stuff, and I made a best friend there, and we got married 2 years ago, in May. We got married. So my life is genuinely getting better. So this is where everyone laughs at my misery and despair, because you're all bad people. You just come to events like this to feel good about yourselves, like me. So why did I tell you a load of embarrassing stuff about myself? And here's the thing. So this is a persona that my wife kindly drew for me, because my drawing is appalling because I'm a designer. And it was based on a persona that some of my team found on the internet. And anyone familiar with lean personas like this? Where you kind of fold it in a square and you kind of do it in a workshop in 10 minutes. And really important thing, I'm not saying personas are bad. I use personas all the time. When I joined the fund, one of the first things I did was work on overhauling our personas. What I'm going to say is that bad personas are bad, which is maybe understandable, but they can also be really, really dangerous as well. So here's a persona. My team were like, "Oh, you kind of fit into this, Jonny." And I've spoken for a few minutes telling you a little bit about myself. And whilst I have no friends, I did once see a BuzzFeed listicle of the 50 things in Friends that will make your heart swell with joy. So I understand the concept of it. But I imagine that you are still able to see how this in no way is adequate to capture the essence of me and understand me, to understand what it is to be a human being, to understand the joy and despair and heartache and immense suffering and the strength to overcome impossible pain. It would just be wholly inadequate for that. But what I've seen in my time with design agencies and working with designers and working with many people who work within tech is that what can sometimes happen is we can create an assumed persona amongst ourselves in a team, and we can whack it on a wall, and it feels like science then, because it's a persona. It feels like something that we can make design decisions on, rather than actually going out to meet the people that we're designing for and understanding. And what I am going to talk to you about as we go on is some of the audiences that I've worked with where actually getting stuff wrong, the difference can be life and death. But before we do, let's talk about everyone's favourite punching bag, Twitter. I'm going to skip some slides because I'm out short of time. Also, this one swears, and my mum might watch. So I want to talk to you about Facebook a little bit. So you may know this, but a few years ago, a data scientist at Facebook called Adam Kramer ran an experiment. It was received a fair amount of press, and I would suggest go reading it there because I don't have too much time to go into it. But essentially the hypothesis they were testing was, if they negatively affect the content on your feed, will you kind of respond in kind? So will you become more negative if you're seeing more negative content, right? That was the experiment they did. Crucially, they did this experiment without consent of their users. And they only ran it, to be fair, they only ran it on slides. 0.04% of their users, so quite a small figure. But obviously, they have quite a lot of people use it. It's not just my mum. So that is 700,000 users. And this is where the persona issue can get into difficulties, because we can help this narrative of us thinking of people as users. And again, I'm not suggesting that we completely throw out that term, that we change the term. I use it all the time. But I think the danger of that term is that it can be incredibly dehumanizing. It can make us think of people as other than people. It can make us think of them as groups. It can make us think of them as cases, as use cases. I think that can be quite dangerous, because as soon as we go down that route, we start to remove ourselves from the consequence of the work that we do and what it can have. So they were thinking of 700,000 users, which, to put it into context, is more than the population of Montenegro. It's more than the population of Malta and Iceland combined. And whilst this number would vary depending on a variety of other factors, you could be talking about up to 42,000 people who suffer from depression. And they're running an experiment where they're wondering, if I negatively affect the content of your Facebook feed, what might happen? because they're thinking of 700,000 users, not 700,000 human beings. And I think our role has to be, when we're making products and services, that even if they're not just digital, I know this is around tech, but just generally we're designing things for people. Our first question always has to be why. Why should this thing exist? What is the worth? Challenging the why of what we do leads to other questions around who might this harm, who we're designing for, what benefit does this have, what wider impact might we have outside of the narrow focus of product and service that we're focusing on. It's an absolutely vital question. We need to wonder what factors exist outside of this small space. What else are we maybe disrupting and not in a good way? What other things are we moving out of the way to make space for what we're building? What other things are our users going through? How might the thing we make affect those? So I want to talk to you about some of the audiences that I've worked with. So sex workers. I don't know how much you know about sex workers, so I'll give you a little bit of the background. This group is many, many, many more times likely to be the victim of violent crime than you or I. You may have seen some news stories like this, but this is happening constantly and regularly, and there will be differences depending on the types of individuals and groups underneath the umbrella of sex workers as a term. But a story when I was working on a product that was aimed at kind of supporting sex workers and violent crime was a conversation with someone who worked at a charity, and they wanted an update to a product that had been built. And I need to be really careful. I'm really conscious of not phrasing things and it appearing glib or triggering someone who has been through a situation. So if that does happen, apologies. It's just because I'm an idiot and ineloquent. So can we kind of shake our heads? There's agreement that it's probably just me being stupid if that's the case. So the update they want to do, essentially this product would help capture a report if a sex worker saw or encountered a dangerous person, and they thought this person was dangerous. They could kind of fill out a report and it would ping it to all the sex workers nearby so they could kind of be a little bit safer. In theory is kind of the concept that was being worked on. But they wanted the report to actually, rather than be this free open text field, they wanted to kind of categorize certain things, because if this ever did end up going down the route of them wanting to make a police complaint, having it structured that kind of aligned with statements was helpful to the case being more successful. So an example of this would be you would reach a category point where you would categorize what had happened. So I believe it was a list of about 7 things, and in this list was things like theft, assault, rape, there was a few other things. And it just went against all of my instincts as a designer and everything I've ever known about user-centered design to ask somebody who had just been raped to tick a box that says rape. It just went, I thought, how is that person emotionally ready? And I prepared to call a client, and as a designer would do, you prepare your argument in advance and you have counter-arguments for the things that they might follow. It's a design process in and of itself, how to convince a client, right? But it convinced me that I know absolutely nothing about sex work. Like, absolutely nothing about it. My level of privilege is so far beyond anything that would put me in a situation where I would know something about this, right? This is an expert who works with them day to day. This is someone who actually knows what they're talking about, unlike me. And the point that they said, and I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, the point they made was that list of things, to the sex worker in question, the actual, and this is where again, please, my phrasing will be completely inappropriate, but I think the actual term that they used was the most distressing thing on that list will be the theft, because the rape is so commonplace for that individual. And it was just horrifying, and I struggled to speak for a little while, I think, and so did the other people who were on the call. And it really hammers home that we know, as designers particularly, I think everyone in tech is maybe prone to this desire to ride in like a white knight with tech to solve social issues, without maybe engaging with people who know, like, I know tech, I know design, I'm not the expert in every social issue. It's about partnership and collaboration and working with people who know what they're talking about. Otherwise, the mistakes we make can be quite terrifying. Onto another fun thing, sexually transmitted diseases. There's an illustration in it though, so it's quite cute. Who doesn't want to talk about gonorrhea? So I was involved in designing a sexual health hub type of platform that was, the earlier versions of it had been to kind of bring together a variety of sexual health advice that would help young people in particular stay safe and understand sexual health a little bit better. And The initial design that we kind of were brought in to redesign, and the client did understand this, to be fair, was very illustration-based because it was aimed at the kids, you know, and it had kid speak, like, I'm trying to think what I'd be allowed to say. Like come and stuff like that, like, you know, kind of really kind of like you speak. This is what the kind of the website was filled of, and they even had anthropomorphic condoms, so condoms with like little eyes and ears and noses to be like friendly. I think they had a name that began with a C, to like Connor the condom or something. And my favorite illustration was a little boat, like a motorboat filled with like a family of anthropomorphic condoms, like riding across the webpage. But because of brand stuff, it was red, so it was like condoms riding across a sea of blood. You could like hover over knickers and they would spin and stuff like that. You know, it's to be fair, they knew that it needed changing. Like it wasn't all the client's fault. But this wasn't just a website to help young people with sexual health. When you kind of dive into it, and we do in the information architecture phase in particular, the other cases that came up were it had to help provide advice if you were victim of domestic abuse. It had to help if you were pregnant and didn't know what to do. It had to provide a variety of options in a sensitive and helpful way. It had to help if you were homosexual and were genuinely worried about, like fearful of your life about coming out to your family and friends. It also had to help if you were a 13-year-old girl who had been raped and was pregnant and was not remotely ready to go to the police or someone else that you knew. And there's knickers that spin because it was focused initially on one particular edge case. And like those, whilst I still laugh thinking about what that was, it properly worried us, and we were speaking with the client who it worried as well. Is really, really important to like make sure that it's not like us versus an evil client. Around this example that came up of what might happen to a 13-year-old girl, actually, could that happen? Is that something that we do need to be prepared for? And they were like, yeah, it could happen. It's really, really rare, but it could. And it did happen, and thankfully the site was able to provide support for that person. And it's what we call crisis cases, which I guess traditionally, I mean, there's a whole argument that should edge case as a thing even exist. But when you're working in the designing for good sector, it's often synonymous with designing for vulnerable people, which are more likely to be oppressed people. And an edge case where in the commercial sector is those, maybe we're not going to get enough worth from them to throw money at it, so we'll just exclude them because that's not where our profit lies. In the designing for good sector, that's a crisis case because maybe it is only that one user who is that 13-year-old girl, but you absolutely have to throw the money and time and resource at making sure that you're there at that moment of crisis. And crisis cases are really hard to detect, and I will come into how I suggest that we can actually help deal with those. But just to talk about one more audience is, I work with a charity that provided abstinence-based recovery for people who were in recovery, abstinence-based recovery for drug and alcohol addiction, and received a really small amount of funding from Comic Relief, their innovation fund, to try and see could digital play a role in supporting these groups of people. I want to take you through a little bit of the process that we went through. I feel we did good work, and it's the nature of funding, which is why I moved to a funder to try and help with that, is that you would always want more money. So that I really have to stress how small this pot of money was. So we had a 3-person team. That was me. I headed a design team up that worked on these kind of projects, project manager, and a user researcher who had previously been specifically a social researcher. So we started with desk research because there's no substitute for actually doing good old-fashioned hard work and see what kind of evidence was out there. And we found out that obviously this was a real troublesome and difficult issue to tackle. There were huge monetary sums involved in the nature of drug and alcohol addiction in the UK, and obviously this would carry on whichever country that you looked into. But as crucially as well, that in 2014 there were over 12,000 deaths related to this. I said collaboration is really important, so we partnered with a charity that already does peer-to-peer support in the ABR community really, really well, so they already know the answer in an offline way. Their difficulties were, how do they scale? There's not much money in doing work like that, like they're not living on yachts and in mansions. they want to make sure they can reach everyone who's in a moment of crisis. How do they do that with limited money and staff? So could digital help support that? Was one of the things we were looking at. They're beautiful, wonderful people. This is some of the group. We went to a few of their community groups. So we ran a bunch of workshops. We worked with some of their service users and some of their staff. We did some exercises like we workshop theory of change. I don't know if anyone has done kind of workshops like this where you start with a solution and what prerequisites have to exist for that to be the case, and then below that what has to exist and what have to exist. And we spoke with some of the service users, which is the terminology that they use, no, service members, and they kind of stuck post-its on the various points where they have good ideas about how to do that, or some people are already doing this really, really well, more people that we could connect with. We built we didn't build it, we ran a pilot test with tech that already exists. So because we were trying to track, could peer-to-peer support be a thing digitally, we did a WhatsApp group and we ran it for a period of, I think, 4 weeks to see actually would they support each other in that kind of digital environment. If somebody put out a call for help, how quickly would someone respond? And obviously there were consent forms all over the place because we were kind of monitoring what was being said and how people were behaving in there. And we built a digital prototype and we did some usability testing on it, and it went so far that in the end actually we received a larger pot of money to try and make the thing. We ended up though with loads of flow diagrams like this where you don't really have to see it, but what the flow diagrams were trying to detect was where could those crisis cases occur? What happened if the tech that we built failed and broke? Where might somebody suffer serious harm, not just because the app didn't exist, but because actually it caused a problem? How do we know we're not making more problems than we're solving? And I was never more proud of my designers when they were in a room with some like quite tense conversations with developers and founders and the like. And they were regularly stepping in, and these were quite junior designers, saying, no, we're not doing that, because if we do that, someone might die. And it was startling to kind of hear those conversations happening, but it made me immensely proud that we've heard lots of talks about design ethics, and I think we need ethical, responsible leaders, but I think we do also need culture existing where more junior members of staff are fully capable and confident and able to say, no, we absolutely can't do that. This thing shouldn't exist. That process shouldn't exist. That approach should not happen because this thing could happen. So the way that I suggested that we can tackle detecting crisis cases and also should this product exist is a red team exercise. So this kind of exists a little bit in IT security, but not quite the way that we do it. This was previously done by journalists or by the military if they were preparing like a big exercise, a big attack or invasion, I guess. And essentially is your product team that you'll probably have if you're making a digital product. They're your blue team, they're the people who do the work, they're the experts, they do the research, they meet with users, they maybe do prototypes and they'll have sketch diagrams and they'll know what we're gonna make. We're gonna make this thing, right? But you keep separate from them a red team, which is an equally skilled, talented group of individuals. And before you write a line of code, before you go too far where you're committed as a company, you have the blue team present their findings and their design decisions to the red team. And the red team's job is to go to war with them. It's to try and find a way that this might do harm. It's to question every decision. It's to question the research. It's to pick holes in the validity of it. It's to question the design decisions. It's to look at those flow charts and say, no, this maybe is a problem. It's to look at the usability studies and say, actually, I think there's an issue here that we've maybe not picked up. Their job is to find ways to break it. And it's tense as hell, as you would imagine, but everyone goes into that knowing that we want the red team to find stuff. We want them to find stuff so we can fix it, or we want them to find stuff so we know this thing shouldn't exist at all. Here's a photo of the Big Lottery Fund doing it for one of our funding products. And I'm conscious for time, so I guess what I want to leave on a little bit is this concept of legacy, which I've been thinking about quite a lot. And it's not legacy in the sense of, how will I be remembered when I die? Because I won't. It's that project with the absence-based recovery. The thing that stood out to me was in one of the workshops, Ian, the researcher, was kind of running the workshop and I was kind of help supporting him. And Rachel, the project manager, who's a really good friend, she was witness our wedding when we got married. And she was kind of sat in the corner, she was kind of taking notes during the session. There's a few points where I thought, I think Rachel's crying. And as the workshop went on, it became really clear that she was really, really crying and quite deeply upset. And when that session kind of had a break, we went for a walk, and I asked, how's she doing? Is she okay? And whilst she's a really, really good friend, what I didn't know was that Rachel's mum had her own battle with alcoholism, and she died when Rachel was quite young. And she said, if this group had existed where my mum was alive, if this thing that we're thinking of making existed, maybe she would be with me now. And again, it was like one of those moments where you feel punched in the stomach. It was utterly devastating. And I remember that a lot when I'm making stuff. I'm regularly asked what's the hardest thing about working specifically in this space. And it is that knowledge that it bothers me that I don't get to look everyone in the eye who's used the product I've made and explain myself. Like, I know that we caught that crisis case of the 13-year-old girl, but how many didn't we catch that I don't know about? How many times has the thing that I've made gone into an area that's meant to help with social change but actually cause a problem that I don't know about? And I can build processes and tools that I think will try and protect as much as possible from that. But the fact that the products will maybe outlive me, or at least outgrow me, so I won't be aware of the areas that they're being used in, bothers me a lot. It bothers me a lot that how often is it that I might think of people as users and not as human beings, and actually not work in a way that is appropriate to that. And that's the legacy I'm thinking of, the legacy of, is the world better for me being in it? And I think maybe not at the minute. I did a lot of really terrible design work for like really evil gambling companies before I tried to soul cleanse with the stuff that I'm doing now. So I've got a lot to do to make up for that. But I guess that would be my challenge for everyone who works in this space, to genuinely question ourselves every day. Is the world better because I'm in it? And I think if we're able to say yes, we're maybe in a good spot. And that is, I believe, it. So thank you very much for listening.